you so much for joining us. As the College of New Rochelle celebrates its founding as the first Catholic college for women in New York, we explore gospel and Catholic social justice teaching to discover understanding and solutions for our troubled world. This evening, we're very honored to have Cardinal Oscar Andre Rodriguez Maradiaga with us to lead us in this exploration. In his person and in his life, Cardinal Rodriguez demonstrates compassion and conscience deeply rooted in gospel values. As pastor of the Church of Honduras, he gives extraordinary service to the people. He is one of Latin America's most vocal and visible Catholic leaders, deeply engaged in the life of his now deeply troubled country and our deeply troubled world. From the depths of his reverence for the dignity of each human being, he champions human rights wherever they are challenged or ignored. Cardinal Rodriguez was born in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and entered the Salesians of St. Don Bosco at the age of 19, and was ordained in Guatemala City in 1970. Speaking 7 languages, he has degrees in philosophy and moral theology, with a doctorate in theology from the Pontifical Lateran University in Rome, and a diploma in clinical psychology and psychotherapy from Leopold Franz University in Innsbruck. He also holds a degree in education, with specializations in physics, mathematics, natural sciences, and chemistry. Additionally, he has studied music and music composition and is an accomplished classical pianist and saxophone player. Even after being named the first cardinal from Honduras, he continued his vocation of teaching, both at the seminary and at the Catholic University of Honduras. He has served as Secretary General and then as President of the Conference of Latin American Bishops, CELAM, and has been a member of a number of pontifical councils, including the Council for Social Communications, the Council for Justice and Peace, and the Commission for Latin America. He was the Vatican spokesperson with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank on the issue of Third World debt, and has been identified as having had great influence in Pope John Paul's effort to persuade rich countries to ease the debt burden on developing nations. In 2007, he was elected president of Caritas International, the global confederation of Catholic humanitarian assistance, development, and social service organizations operating in more than 200 countries. In May 2008, he honored us as we honored him and became a CNR alumnus when he received an honorary degree at our commencement for his compassion and generously sharing his many talents on behalf of the poor and victimized people of the world. His life affirms the gospel imperative: to whom much is given, much is expected. Speaking at the United States Catholic Bishops' Conference on Social Justice, he said, "The real weapons of mass destruction are not toxic gases or deadly viruses, but poverty and social injustice." We are honored to have him with us tonight to share his thoughts with us. Your Eminence, welcome home to Alma Mater. Cardinal.
It's not necessary to say how happy I feel in my alma mater. The challenge, the love, and the call of hope, the global perspectives on Catholic social mission. The Holy Spirit is the energy which transforms the heart of the ecclesial community, so that it becomes a witness before the world to the love of the Father, who wishes to make humanity a single family in His Son. The entire activity of the church is an expression of a love that seeks the integral good of man. It seeks his evangelization through world and sacraments. And undertaking that is often heroic in the way it is acted out in history. And it seeks to promote man in the various areas of life and human activity. Love is therefore the service that the church carries out in order to attend constantly to man's suffering and his needs, including material needs. And this is the reason this service of charity, what gathers us tonight when we reflect on the Catholic social ministry. Love of neighbor, grounded in the love of God, is first and foremost a responsibility for each individual member of the faithful. But it is also a responsibility for the entire ecclesial community at every level, from the local community to the particular church and to the church universal in its entirety. As a community, the church must practice love. Love those needs to be organized if it is to be an order service to the community. The awareness of this responsibility has had a constitutive relevance in the church from the beginning, as the Acts of the Apostles tells us. All who believed were together and had all things in common, and they sold their possessions and goods and distributed them to all as any had need. As the church grew, this radical form of material communion could not in fact be preserved, but its essential core remained. Within the community of believers, there can never be room for a poverty that denies anyone what is needed for a dignified life. For the church, charity is not a kind of welfare activity which could equally well be left to others, but is part of her nature, an indispensable expression of her very being. The church is God's family in the world. In this family, no one ought to go without the necessities of life. Yet, at the same time, Caritas extends beyond the frontiers of the church. The parable of the Good Samaritan remains as a standard which imposes universal love towards the needy whom we encounter by chance, whoever they may be. Within the ecclesial family, no member should suffer through being in need. The United States of America faces political challenges that demand urgent moral choices. The call from the bishops of the United States gave us a clear summary. A nation at war with all of its human costs. A country often divided by race and ethnicity. A nation of immigrants struggling with immigration. You are an affluent society where too many live in poverty. Part of a global community confronting terrorism and facing urgent threats to the environment. A culture built on families where some now question the value of marriage and family life. This is a very good description that the American bishops made. But amongst the big challenges we face today, hope is the virtue by which we can face our present. The present, even if it's arduous, difficult, can believe and accept it if it leads toward a goal, if we can be sure of this goal, and if this goal is great enough to justify the effort of the journey. One of the very creative ideas of the encyclical letter of Benedict XVI, Spe Salvi, is what Christian message is not only informative, but performative. I didn't reflect on this. You know, I love aviation. I became a pilot. And, of course, we are familiar to the performance of the planes. But to talk that a virtue is performative is really new. I never heard this in the magisterium of the pontifex. And this is very powerful, because it means, what's the meaning of performative? It means the gospel is not merely a communication of things that can be known. It is one that makes things happen and is life-changing. The dark door of time of the future has been thrown open. The one who has hope lives differently. The one who hopes has been granted the gift of a new life. This is the power of our faith, if we live it in a concrete way, if we live it in a coherent way. The compendium of the social doctrine of the Church reminds us that a just society can become a reality only when it is based on the respect of the transcendent dignity of the human person. The person represents the ultimate end of society, by which it is order to the person. Hence, the social order and its development must invariably work to the benefit of the human person, since the order of things is to be subordinate to the order of persons, and not the other way around. Respect for human dignity can in no way be separated from obedience to this principle. It is necessary to consider every neighbor, without exception, as another self, taking into account, first of all, his life and the means necessary for living it with dignity. Every political, economic, social, scientific, and cultural program must be inspired by the awareness of the primacy of each human being over society. Of course, it is a matter of pride, the support to the human rights, but there are failures even to protect the fundamental right to life, especially for unborn children. The service of the bishops is to help Catholics form their consciences in accordance with the truth, so they can make sound moral choices in addressing these challenges, especially in times when elections are approaching in every nation. There are many Christians who say that the clergy should not mix in politics, that there is separation between church and state, and others that religion is a matter exclusively of the private life. Privatization was a recipe I would say, not a prescription, like a recipe of kitchen when the World Bank was making that recipe to our economies, and they were resulted in more poverty. Of course, this is not the gospel of Jesus Christ, who called us to be witnesses of the truth. The doctrine of the Church is very clear, and we in Latin America had a deep reflection in the document of Puebla in 1979, when we were in the middle of terrible civil wars, especially in Central America. The political commitment of Catholics is often placed in the context of the autonomy of the state. That is, the distinction between the political and religious spheres. This distinction is a value that has been attained and recognized by the Catholic Church and belongs to the inheritance of contemporary civilization. Catholic moral doctrine, however, clearly rejects the prospects of an autonomy that is understood as independent from the moral law. Such autonomy refers first of all to the attitude of the person who respects the truth that derive from natural knowledge regarding man's life and society, even in such truth, if such truth may also be taught by a specific religion, because truth is only one. A sincere quest for the truth, using legitimate means to promote and defend the moral truths concerning social life, justice, freedom, respect for life and for other human rights, is the right and duty of all members of a social and political community. We have the gift of the newest encyclical letter from Benedict XVI, Caritas in Veritate. I recommend it highly to you. Read it and you will see that he is overcoming an objection that many times was made to the social doctrine of the church. You are talking, okay, in life matters you can go away, but in social matters we consider you. No, it's the same life. We don't have different lives. We have only one. And so the union of that is a merit of this encyclical letter that I hope in the community can be studied, because it's very rich for the future. When the church's magisterium intervenes in issues concerning social and political life, it does not fail to observe the requirements of a correctly understood autonomy, for the church magisterium does not wish to exercise political power or eliminate the freedom of opinion of Catholics regarding contingent questions. Instead, it intends as its proper function to instruct and illuminate the conscience of the faithful, particularly those involved in political life, so that their actions may always serve the integral promotion of the human person and the common good. The social doctrine of the church is not an intrusion into the government of individual countries. It is a question of the lay Catholic's duty to be morally coherent, found within one's conscience, which is one and indivisible. I was quoting the compendium of the social doctrine of the church. The social ministry in this powerful nation does not only belong to the diocese or lay groups, but has a big impact for the whole church around the world. Of course, we must not tell Catholics how to vote in any nation. The responsibility to make political choices rests with each person and his or her properly formed conscience. Then comes the usual question: why does the church teach about issues affecting public policy? The church's obligation to participate in shaping the moral character of society is a requirement of our faith, a part of the mission given to us by Jesus Christ. Faith helps us see more clearly the truth about human life and dignity that we also understand through human reason. As people of both faith and reason, we must not forget that John Paul II was giving us a treasure in that letter encyclical. Ratio, veritas et ratio. The truth and the ratio. This is very important. Veritatis splendor, the splendor of the truth. Catholics are called to bring truth to political life and to practice Christ's commandments to love one another. This is not easy in our times, when individualism is prevailing in almost all the aspects of life. But the work of social ministry in the church is mainly building bridges of understanding between societies with the message of the gospel. prophets to speak on behalf of the poorest of the poor and to bring to the table of discussion the voice of the weak and vulnerable. Standing with and caring for the poor is as central to the church as proclaiming the gospel and celebrating the sacraments. According to Pope Benedict XVI in his first encyclical letter, Deus Caritas Est, charity must animate the entire lives of the lay faithful, and therefore also their political activity lead as social charity. Some people never heard about this. Can charity be social? Most be social charity. This puts to rest the false division between practicing charity and working for justice. It is one and only duty, and all of us are called to make this connection. In fact, Pope Benedict says, since the 19th century, an objection has been raised to the church's charitable activity, subsequently developed with particular insistence by Marxism. The poor, it is claimed, do not need charity but justice. Works of charity, alms given, are in effect a way for the rich to shirk their obligation to work for justice and a means of soothing their consciences while preserving their own status and robbing the poor of their rights. In today's complex situation, not least because of the growth of a globalized economy, the Church's social doctrine has become a set of fundamental guidelines offering approaches that are valid even beyond the confines of the Church. In the face of ongoing development, these guidelines need to be addressed in the context of dialogue with all those seriously concerned for humanity and for the world in which we live. In order to define more accurately the relationship between the necessary commitment to justice and the ministry of charity, two fundamental situations need to be considered. First, the just ordering of society and the state is a central responsibility of politics. As St. Augustine once said, a state which is not governed according to justice would be just a bunch of thieves. How do you like that? It was St. Augustine. And the Pope is quoting that in his encyclical. Remota itaque justitia, qui sunt regna, nisi magna latrocinia. When you take out the justice, said St. Augustine, what are becoming the kingdoms? Just a bunch of thieves. Fundamental to Christianity is the distinction between what belongs to Caesar and what belongs to God. Usually they say, you priest, go to the sacristy. That's your place. No, because we are citizens as well. And so, this is the difference. In other words, the distinction between church and state, or as the Second Vatican Council puts it, the autonomy of the temporal sphere. The state may not impose religion, yet it must guarantee religious freedom and harmony between the followers of different religions. For her part, the Church, as the social expression of Christian faith, has a proper independence and is structured on the basis of her faith as a community which the state must recognize. The two spheres are distinct, yet always interrelated. Justice is both the aim and the intrinsic criterion of all politics. Politics is more than a mere mechanism for defining the rules of public life. Its origin and its goals are found in justice, which by its very nature has to do with ethics. The This is one of the richness of the last encyclical letter. Because all the troubles of the economy we are suffering now became of because they were putting ethics out of economy. And they said that everything was permitted. I recall when the big failure of Enron, you will remember, was one of the first signs. A commentator wrote, the problem of the people of Enron is that they took the 10 commandments, not as commandments, but as recommendations. And this is a big problem. The state must inevitably face a question of how justice can be achieved here and now. But this presupposes an even more radical question. What is justice? The problem is one of practical reason. But if reason is to be exercised properly, it must undergo constant purification, since it can never be completely free of the danger of a certain ethical blindness caused by the dazzling effect of power and special interests. This was one of the problems, that many of the people in the economy were blind by greediness. The Pope calls clearly in his last encyclical letter. Here, politics and faith meet. Faith, by its specific nature, is an encounter with the living God. An encounter opening up new horizons, extending beyond the sphere of reason. But it is also a purifying force for reason itself. From God's standpoint, faith liberates reason from its blind spots, and therefore helps it to be ever more fully itself. Faith enables reason to do its work more effectively and to see its proper object more clearly. This is where Catholic social doctrine has its place. It has no intention of giving the Church power of the state. That's wrong. Even less is it an attempt to impose on those who do not share the faith ways of thinking and modes of conduct proper to faith. Its aim is simply to help purify reason and to contribute here and now to the acknowledgement and attainment of what is just. The Church's social teaching argues on the basis of reason and natural law, namely on the basis of what is in accord with the nature of every human being. It recognizes that it is not the Church's responsibility to make this teaching prevail in political life. No. Rather, the Church wishes to help form consciences in political life and to stimulate greater insight into the authentic requirements of justice, as well as greater readiness to act accordingly, even when these might involve conflict with situations of personal interest. This is one of our problems in Latin America. We have a Catholic university in Honduras, and you know, I was very much interested in establishing a school of political science. Okay. Finally, with great efforts, I even got communication with a German university, and they started to sponsor our school of political science. When I opened it, nobody came. Not a single pupil came. How do you like that? Because they think that it's not necessary to study political science. For most of our people, to go to politics is to be a very clever and astute person that know all the tricks, and that's a good politician. This is wrong, totally wrong. And they have transformed politics in a business. So it's like an industry where you during a political campaign to get the revenues during the government. It means to steal all what is available and to live the rest of your life without working. And this is the worst part of the situation in Latin America. We need to prepare different politicians, those who know what are the goals of political science. And politics is the common good of the people. And this is the biggest, maybe the biggest challenge for us. Building a just social and civil order wherein each person receives what is in or his or her due is an essential task which every generation must take up anew. As a political task, this cannot be the Church's immediate responsibility. Yet, since it is also a most important human responsibility, the Church is duty-bound to offer, through the purification of reason and through ethical formation, her own specific contribution towards understanding the requirements of justice and achieving them politically. The Church cannot and must not take upon herself the political battle to bring about the most just society possible. She cannot and must not replace the state. Yet, at the same time, she cannot and must not remain on the sidelines of the fight for justice. She has to play her part through rational argument, and she has to reawaken the spiritual energy without which justice, which always demands sacrifice, cannot prevail and prosper. A just society must be the achievement of politics, not of the Church. Yet the promotion of justice through efforts to bring about openness of mind and will to the demands of the common good is something which concerns the Church deeply. And the second point, love, caritas, will always prove necessary. Always. Even in the most just society. There is no ordering of the state so just that it can eliminate the need for a service of love. Whoever wants to eliminate love is preparing to eliminate man as such. There will always be suffering which cries out for consolation and help. There will always be loneliness. There will always be situations of material need where help in the form of concrete love of neighbor is indispensable. The state which would provide everything, absorbing everything into itself, would ultimately become a mere bureaucracy, incapable of guaranteeing the very thing which the suffering person, every person, needs, namely, loving personal concern. We do not need a state which regulates and controls everything, but a state which, in accordance with the principle of subsidiarity, generously acknowledges and supports initiatives arising from the different social forces and combines spontaneity with closeness to those in need. The Church is one of those living forces. She is alive with the love enkindled by the Spirit of Christ. This love does not simply offer people material help, but refreshment and care for their souls. Something which often is even more necessary than material support. In the end, the claim that just social structures would make works of charity superfluous masks a materialist conception of man, the mistaken notion that man can live by bread alone, a conviction that demons man and ultimately disregards all that is specifically human. We can now determine more precisely in the life of the Church the relationship between commitment to the just ordering of the state and society on the one hand, and organized charitable activity on the other. The formation of just structures is not directly the duty of the church, but belongs to the world of politics, the sphere of the autonomous use of reason. The church has an indirect duty here, in that she is called to contribute to the purification of reason and to the reawakening of those moral forces without which just structures are neither established nor prove effective in the long run. The direct duty to work for a just ordering of society, on the other hand, is proper to the lay faithful. As citizens of the state, they are called to take part in public life in a personal capacity, so they cannot relinquish their participation in the many different economic, social, legislative, administrative, and cultural areas which are intended to promote organically and institutionally the common good. The mission of the lay faithful is therefore to configure social life correctly, respecting its legitimate autonomy and cooperating with other citizens according to their respective competences and fulfilling their own responsibility. Even if the specific expressions of ecclesial charity can never be confused with the activity of the state, it still remains true that charity must animate the entire lives of the lay faithful, and therefore also their political activity, lived as social charity, as the Pope told us. God is justice and creates justice. This is our consolation and our hope. And in His justice there is also grace. We must never forget this, because it's not only a natural world. There is a supernatural activity, is the activity of the grace. This we know by turning our gaze to the crucified and risen Christ. Both these things, justice and grace, must be seen in their correct inner relationship. Grace does not cancel out justice. It does not make wrong into right. It is not a sponge which wipes everything away so that whatever someone has done on earth ends up being of equal value. The church's charitable organizations, on the other hand, constitute an opus proprium, a proper work of the church, a task agreeable to her, in which she does not cooperate collaterally, but acts as a subject with direct responsibility, doing what corresponds to her nature. The church can never be exempted from practicing charity as an organized activity of believers, and on the other hand, there will never be a situation where the charity of each individual Christian is unnecessary, because in addition to justice, man needs and will always need love. Most countries' constitution protects the right of individual believers and religious bodies to participate and speak out without government interference, favoritism, or discrimination. Civil law should recognize and protect the church's right and responsibility to participate in society without abandoning our central moral convictions. The tradition of pluralism of many nations is enhanced, not threatened, when religious groups and people of faith bring their convictions into public life. The Catholic community brings to the political dialogue a consistent moral framework and broad experience serving those in need. In the Catholic tradition, responsible citizenship is a virtue, and participation in political life is a moral obligation. As Catholics, we should be guided more by our moral convictions than by our attachment to a political party or interest group. In today's environment, Catholics may feel politically disenfranchised sensing that no party and few candidates fully share our comprehensive commitment to human life and dignity. Catholic lay women and men need to act on the Church's moral principles and become more involved, running for office, working with political parties, and communicating concerns to elect officials. Even those who cannot vote should raise their voices on matters that affect their lives and the common good. As the American bishops courageously stated, it is necessary to work for a better world, not only a safer world. It is necessary to overcome terror by justice. And I am approaching to the end. I will leave you my pages so you can read and meditate, because it's better to answer to your questions. Well, we should have to talk about poverty, but this is a theme that has been addressed a lot, and I will leave you my reflections. There are many forms of poverty. There are no certain privations of deprivations which deserve this name. The denial of the limitation of human rights, as for example, the right to religious freedom, the right to share in the building of society, the freedom to organize and to form unions, to take initiatives in economic matters. Do these not impoverish the human person as much as, if no more than, the deprivation of material goods? Of course. And is development which does not take into account the full affirmation of these rights really development on the human level? The fact is that many people, perhaps the majority today, do not have the means which would enable them to take their place in an effective and humanly dignified way within a productive system in which work is truly central. Thus, if not actually exploited, they are to a great extent marginalized and even more excluded from the globalized economy. This is a matter that we should discuss long, how solidarity is still a matter that needs to be implemented in our societies. Economic development takes place over their heads, so to speak, when it does not actually reduce the already narrow scope of their own subsistent economies. Many other people, said the encyclical letter of John Paul II, Centesimus Annus, many other people, while not completely marginalized, live in situations in which the struggle for a bare minimum is uppermost. Unfortunately, the great majority of people in the third world still live in such conditions. Charity is the greatest social commandment. It respects others and their rights. It requires the practice of justice, and it alone makes us capable of it. Charity inspires a life of self-giving. Whoever seeks to gain his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will preserve it, tells us the gospel. It will not be superfluous, therefore, to re-examine and further clarify in this light the characteristic themes and guidelines dealt with by the magisterium in the recent years. One of them, the preferential option of love of preference for the poor, a special form of primacy in the exercise of Christian charity. I would like to conclude with some precious words of Spe Salvi, the Benedict II encyclical. Remains us that the Latin word consolatio, consolation, teaches us with strength. It suggests being with the other in his solitude, so that he ceases to be solitude. Furthermore, the capacity to accept suffering for the sake of goodness, truth, and justice is an essential criterion of humanity. Because in my own well-being and safety are ultimately more important than truth and justice, then the power of the stronger prevails, then violence and untruth reign supreme. Truth and justice must stand above my comfort and physical well-being, or else my life itself becomes a lie. In the end, even the yes to love is a source of suffering, because love always requires expropriations of my I, in which I allow myself to be pruned and wounded. Love simply cannot exist without this painful renunciation of myself, for otherwise it becomes pure selfishness and thereby ceases to be love. A friend of mine used to say, egonomics should be replaced by economics. Facing so many big challenges, one can be discouraged or even depressed. What can we do? Here I would like to recall again the encyclical Spe Salvi. Human life is a journey. Towards what destination? How do we find the way? Life is like a voyage on the sea of history, often dark and stormy. A voyage in which we watch for the stars that indicate the route. The true stars of our life are the people who have lived good lives. They are lights to hope. Certainly, Jesus Christ is the true light, the sun that has risen above all the shadows of history. But to reach him, we also need lights close by. People who shine with this light and so guide us along